So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario. This one made by Colonel Speaks 46, which is good to see someone else getting involved with this sort of thing. And it's a rather intimidating looking map when you look at it from the top of one of these peaks here, because it is a very mountainous one indeed. And this is going to be a battle between primarily Dwarven forces, I think, in the red, and Goblin forces in the blue. So there is the theme there, albeit I do believe at this back end of the settlement here there is the closest thing really to a structured fort. I mean, much of it is still just based around the mountainous terrain and the choke points that it offers, and there's many routes that lead here, almost like capillaries really, that lead through the mountains towards this singular point at the back around the Sauron monuments and the mostly crumbled forts. Angmar here also, I mean, that is fitting, I think, because this maybe resembles a little bit more what you would expect from GUNDABAD's realm, perhaps, because it is above the surface for the most part, and yeah, certainly rather wintry by its nature. And I suppose that means we will be going through the red team first and foremost. I believe their intent is to try and launch some ambushes. I think the initial attack actually will be coming from the blue team as they march through the pathways, and then later on the dwarves are intended to counter-attack back towards the fort. We'll see if that's how it works out. It could be that the dwarves here end up on the defence for the majority of the game, in which case things are a bit lopsided, but then we have seen a few more interesting scenarios of late where it's not just a straight up attack defence, there is a little bit more give and take. So let's see what this one has to offer. Ricky Beagle is going to be playing as the dwarves of Erebor. Sons of Durin should do really well, honestly, against all orcish factions, but yeah, the goblins, what little defence they do have, especially with their higher end units, does come from their armour, so they're going to be very well suited to taking on those. And of course Angmar, very well known for their heavy armour, so these hammers are going to find plenty of purchase there. One of the finest units of throwing axes in the game are the Dragon Slayer's Trackers, very good in melee as well. I mean, they do wield that axe more like a spear, it has to be said, but still very good multifaceted unit this, and obviously we know how deadly throwing axes can be, and in narrow terrain they can be especially deadly because it concentrates that damage that they do have. We've got the Erebor Legionaries here again. In terms of quality, you would certainly expect the dwarves to have the upper end against especially the goblins, but that has always been the give and take between the two factions, is the huge numbers advantage the goblins have against the solid metal and resilience really of the dwarves. We have the Ironfoot Pikes just in over here as well. Very good unit of pikes this. In fact, in terms of standard rank and file pikes, they're probably the best in the game, just because they do have that shield which mitigates the primary weakness that polearm units tend to have. And also they're perfectly adequate in terms of their stats also. Numbers wise maybe a little bit lower, but I think the plus points more than make up for that. We've got more Erebor Legionaries, so some pretty high quality units here on the front. Interesting to see the Ironfoot War Goats as well, just giving them a bit of mobility, but time will tell how useful that will actually be in terrain such as this. We do have the standard axe throwers as well, the Ironfoot axe throwers, obviously not quite as show-stopping as the Dragon Slayer's Trackers we've already seen, but they will still do the job, especially against more lowly units that the Misty Mountains have to offer. And Ironfoot Warriors are here as well to help bulk out the army with the armour upgrades as well. They should do quite nicely in the one-to-one engagements that we would probably expect them to be in here. And we've got a unit of crossbows as well, but considering the kind of map that it is, I think the dwarves will not be too disappointed that they've got a little bit more in terms of their infantry power to try and hold down those choke points and wear the enemy down. Moving on, we have Google Bobble, who's going to be playing as Khazad. In terms of their infantry expertise, they have the most among the dwarves, you would suggest, certainly from a damage dealing perspective. 2nd Legion Axe Guard with the armour upgrades here, so again, more of that armour piercing which the dwarves have in their shock infantry, going to come in very handy in a battle such as this. Upgraded 3rd Legion Infantry as well, similar story really to the Erebor Legionaries, only even more so when you upgrade the armour especially. They are going to be very domineering against equivalent units from the other side, but again, fewer of them, that's always the trade-off in Total War, not just Medieval 2. 2nd Legion, we've got the Khazad Reclaimers, so even more throwing axes here. We've got maybe less survivability than the Dragon Slayer's Trackers, and also less sort of high-end damage in general. They lack that 2nd hit point as well, but again, two-handed axe in melee, very damaging at range, so that's going to be a real problem for the blue team to contend with. Sentries of Khazad Pikes, in this respect you would give the edge to Erebor, certainly more solid pikes than the sentries, but they will still do just fine, especially considering against them. They're going to have mostly halberds, which they can outrange, and just in general, they're going to be able to hold orcs and goblins at arm's length as long as the numbers advantage is not too crushing. And that's where a unit like the Sons of the Fallen can come in to help solidify things. Very, very defensively adept. Maybe not quite as damaging as you would like for a unit of this expense, but that's not really what they're all about. They're really here to keep your front line keeping it solid. 4th Legion Shield Guard with the armour upgrades as well. Armour upgrades all around, not too surprising to see that either. So we've got the infantry, we've also got the 1st Legion Pikes. Arguably the finest unit of pikes in the game because of the armor piercing they have. It really depends what you're after, whether you want a shield, whether you want a second hit point, whether you want armor piercing, what your preference is going to be. But they could be really, really deadly on a battlefield such as this. 3rd Legion Infantry, the Hammers of Gundabad, the locked morale monsters. They'll be able to keep fighting indefinitely, really. And then the Guards of Khazad, an armor piercing bodyguard unit. All kinds of Khazad flanking the formation, so long range abilities for Khazad. And then we've also got the Mithril Guard over here with that 3rd hit point of there. So yeah, very intimidating army indeed from Khazad. Moving along. Right, so you might notice a little bit of a downgrade in terms of the visual fidelity now, and that's because I've had to drop the visuals down to see if I can make this work, because this is my 3rd attempt now at completing the army composition phase without it crashing, which is a little bit of a concern. I could of course be talking to myself at this point, because if it continues in the vein that it has, less than 300 frames into the battle, then I will not be able to use this one, unfortunately. But yes, we shall see how it goes. So I'll skip over these fairly quickly. So we've got the Erebor Legionaries here en masse. This is mostly the same army composition as the one that we saw from the other Erebor army, only this one has the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin and a slightly lower contingent of standard iron for axe throwers from FW Lewis. And then over here we have the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains. Some units that got knocked over, which is perhaps because the Stone Giant has just made his way through. Real juggernaut, of course. Ered Luin in general, they're going to have a little bit more of a ranged presence. You know, they're going to have the Marksmen of Thorin's Halls and the Frost Spears with their repeaters, in addition to the High Thanes offering that close range punch. They've got a little bit more in terms of dual wielding, well, a lot more, giving them a little bit more melee defense up front, which if it does turn into a melee slog will be very useful for them. And they've got plenty of spear presence as well, albeit maybe less of the sort of high-end line infantry that you would expect from the other two dwarven factions. Moving on to the pseudo-defenders, I suppose. We've got Mevin playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, Black Orcs of the Mountains here, with some Moria Halberdiers in close attendance also. What did that say there? I mean, that's clearly a Balrog. Yeah, Balrog _ elephant. We'll keep an eye on that one. I mean, the Warg Riders are here, Cave Trolls, monstrous units. I mean, Heavy Goblin crossbows. There are a few instances where you can get into some good firing positions. We'll see if the Misty Mountains are going to be capable of doing that. Moria Spear Guard, couple of units of, well, several units of them. Should be pretty decent in terms of the level of efficiency you can get with them, as long as you can back them up properly. Goblin Kingsguard at the centre, Snaga Skirmishes, and then the White Orc Fearmongers. I mean, the Balrog _ elephant, as it is here, has got the same model as the Valar Alcar from Silmarillion. I mean, it looks very resplendent. You're not going to be able to blend in with that, though. The enemies are very much going to be able to see that one coming from a mile away. Moving on, we have Moto once again playing as another Misty Mountains force. I'd imagine similar things here. A couple of units of Black Orcs. The Mountain Orc Berserkers, second hit point on them, will make them last for a little bit longer, and the armor piercing swings against the dwarves are going to be very important for the goblins' chances of making a dent in them early on. We've got the Drake Broodlings over here, we've got the Cave Trolls, Goblin Infantry, Blackback Mountain Berserkers, again another important feather in their cap. The damage dealing units they do have are pretty impressive in places, so they will be reliant on that with the healthy amount of armor piercing they have spread throughout their army to really make that impact against those high quality dwarves they're facing off against. Black Orcs and Goblin Kingsguard backing things up. And then more Cave Trolls. I mean, monstrous infantry is very effective, but the Cave Trolls certainly go down more quickly than the equivalents from Mordor and Isengard. And then we've got Moria Spearguard and Snaga at the back. And finally, we have got Colonel Speaks himself for the Misty Mountains armies at the very least, with Bolg's champions. So again, fast movers. How useful are they going to be in these narrow corridors? We don't know, but cavalry can be very useful in a breakout scenario, so we'll see. Heavy Goblin crossbows, plenty of Snaga skirmishes as well, so they've got plenty of projectiles they can use. over here, but does that mean their front line is going to be a little bit compromised? Cave Trolls, useful at breaking their way through all those Erebor pikes potentially. More Mountain Orc Berserkers and White Turret Fearmongers offering the heart and soul really of what this front line is going to be about, with the Blackback Berserkers at the centre, and Cave Troll Drummers going to be trying their best to do the business as well. White Turret Fearmongers, and then over here we've got some more Moria Spearguards, so a bit of a spread out army, but then the potential does exist for Colonel Speaks to elect to retreat backwards as well towards the Citadel, which is going to be manned by the Angmarim, who are going to be played by the Flame of Arnor. So we've got some Angmar Marauders, Guardians of Khan Doom. I mean, it is rather fitting that Angmar are at the summit, considering we can only assume that this is in the region of Angmar in general, or Gundabad. So we've got the Witch Realm Pikemen as well, fully upgraded. Again, more fast movers, but the Scourge Raiders are a throwing cavalry, or well, throwing projectile cavalry units. So they've got a little bit more going on that they could be used for than sheer brute strength, and there's another unit of them there. Trolls of Angmar made of sterner stuff than the equivalents from the Misty Mountains as well. Witch Realm Hammerguard, armor piercing maybe less of a priority for Angmar in general. They prioritise just being defensively adept more than anything else, more of a match for the dwarves in that regard, but still they do have the occasional unit which is going to cause that fear in the dwarves. And then the Witch Realm Blackguard also, and I think that's pretty much it. I mean, they can't really retreat too much further. There's this final stand area around the Sauron statue at the back. I mean, it doesn't seem to be crashing. It was crashing with a little bit more frequency when I had the shadows turned on, so hopefully that has fixed it. It does give it a bit more of a gloomy atmosphere, but yeah, we'll see. It's odd that shadows should be causing that. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that, because I really want to show this map, because it's not often we get to see a purely mountain-based siege battle like this, so we'll see. I'll make a little bit of a cut, because of course the advances towards one another had to happen, and the initial setups do as well, and we'll rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So I guess we're getting underway pretty quickly here, albeit I don't necessarily know how impactful or otherwise this particular fight is going to be. It's not very often that you see a Balrog completely dwarfed by something else on the field. I mean, it's a Clash of the Titans, but it's also one of those instances where Medieval 2's animations probably don't do a fight like this too much justice. It does mean, of course, that the real tour de force that both sides have is going to be at the very least severely weakened or outright killed off as a result of this rather clumsy encounter. Excuse me. There's also no battle sounds, which is a little bit peculiar. A fight which is almost entirely silent. It's quite a surreal experience, really, isn't it? You can tell they don't really know what to do against one another either, because the animations and the actual attacks that they're landing on one another are not particularly consistent. I think the Balrog is landing more hits, however. I think the Stone Giant is struggling a little bit more when it comes to actually attacking his foe. You can see some orcs in the distance as well. Forces of the orcs a little bit more spread out now throughout all of the passages as they continue to circle one another. It's probably one of the most bizarre openings to a battle I've ever covered, really. And now the Balrog is, I was thinking about leaving, although I suppose he's trying to get the charge as well. Could be significant. I mean, the thing is as well, like, the Stone Giant for some, well, it does get bloodied as well, so you can tell when it's actually injured, and that is not the case at the moment. So yeah, very odd indeed. Stone Giant will be able to at least stomp again, but it's hard to tell if he's actually landing hits. It is an AoE attack, so I would assume it is. We don't really have the context of all the other infantry units around here to show just how large both of these units actually are. There is actually battle sounds going on now, albeit it's not particularly fitting for this kind of encounter. At any rate, we'll move over here. do think turning the quality down has led to the crashing issues subsiding. We keep our fingers crossed for that. That is weird though, because I mean, I've definitely showcased far more demanding maps in terms of shadows than this one. Just one of those weird things, I guess. Meanwhile, technically 3 Balrogs in one. Technically 2 stone giants. Still no one else wanting to come forwards. Those weird instances where we're going to go to ×2 speed early on in the battle because the rest of the forces have not. Well, there we go. The AoE attacks of the stone giant are enough in the end to finish the Balrog off. So the scariest looking unit certainly on the field for the de facto defenders today has been vanquished. And even stranger is the fact that we're now going to go up to ×6 speed an early stage in proceedings. I mean, having a look at the map as a whole as well, there are some wider open spaces. Lots of ground to cover. Although I'd imagine both sides would be a little bit more comfortable when things are more narrow. Utilising units such as the wargs. Probably going to be giving the goblins and orcs a little bit more of an edge in that regard. Stone giant on the way back. The wargs thinking better of it. Imagine seeing the Balrog dead in the dirt and then the stone giant cresting the hill. This foe might be beyond you. Ooh, not even getting the charge off either. Bumping into the stone giant. Yet the stomp actually didn't do any damage there, and there he goes. I guess it goes to show how damaged he really was against the Balrog, but it is interesting he wasn't bloodied, although I suppose that is another instance maybe of something being lost when the graphics are turned down, such as this. A very bizarre opening all in all to this battle so far. Mountain Orc Berserkers hovering. Seeing the Dwarven army before them. Again, the fact they are this spread out, it is. I'm not entirely sure what the setup is supposed to be here. Again, ×6 speed. This is usually the sort of moments in the battle that I would cut out, but that wasn't really possible because of the strange kaiju battle that we had to bear witness to. Very small amount of goblins on display here. Wargs marshalling this angle, but Ered Luin now moving their entire army down this passageway. And all the Dwarven armies are now on the move. This small amount of Misty Mountains resistance is going to at least keep the attention of some of these Erebor units as the rest of the army marches down the southernmost passage, Ered Luin going down the northernmost one, and then two Dwarven armies in the middle have got a few options available to them. Erebor legionaries should easily be able to deal with something like the Moria Spear Guard. Helm piercing is all well and good, but it's certainly not on the level of quality that would be needed to vanquish the kind of Dwarven infantry they find themselves going up against. I mean, the flip side of that is Mountain Orc Berserkers are a little bit more of a problem, but they charge directly into the front of pikes, initially able to get some kills, but as the battle wears on, surely the length of the Dwarven weaponry is going to be something that comes into sharp relief. The Cave Troll drummers are here. I mean, the Berserkers, of course, are lock morale anyway, so those drummers, the only thing they're really doing is going to be keeping the Moria Spear Guard in the fight for just that little bit longer. Durin. Also adding their expertise, the rest of the Erebor army on the move. Second of the Erebor armies marching through the mountains as well. Again, a choice to be made, but the scattered nature of the Misty Mountains armies. Would come the Angmar axe thrower cavalry. Going to attempt to do some hit and runs on the dwarves as they move forwards. Erebor, though, with their own axe throwers and crossbows, should be able to ward off a unit such as this without too many issues. Meanwhile, another blob of goblins as the dwarves of the Blue Mountains march their way forwards as well. All of the goblins are marshalling all of these routes that lead between the main passageways that lead back towards the fortress. At the back, the Scourge Raiders did move forwards. Singular volley. Pikes can get on the front line if they want to prevent any sort of charging, but I'd recommend the axe throwers to be the answer there. Well, not terribly surprising. Things are not going too well for the goblins here. Sons of Durin as well. The armor piercing not going to be terribly handy against the Mountain Orc Berserkers, but there's really none of them left. Among Berserker class units, they perhaps have some of the least staying power, even with that second hit point that they do have. That is really brought into sharp relief when they're isolated in the manner that they were here. Erebor. The rest of the army, once again having to deal with the combination of Moria Spearguard and Mountain Orc Berserkers. The Pikes once again should be able to do that just fine. The Ironfoot Warriors maybe not quite on the same level. Sons of Durin charging into the front of the Whiter at Fearmongers. This is a matchup where the Misty Mountains will be a little bit more pleased with how that could go. But if that formation gets buckled, that's why the hammers will start to really come into their own. And the dwarves able to overlap on the goblins here. Again, the stretched out nature of Colonel Speak's army makes this a pretty difficult task to try and contain the more concentrated dwarven strength. Mervyn may very well be on the receiving end of such things as well. See how that goes. Over here, meanwhile, still having to deal with the Scourge Raiders being an annoyance. And there's also the Drake Broodlings in the background, so it's a bit scattered. I mean, the dwarves being as condensed as they are should be in their favour, but they do have to keep mindful of the fact that they don't want to get hit in the back by trolls or drakes or anything of the likes, and they do need to keep a formation tight. Slowly moving forwards. Still the hit and run continues. So the drummers leaving after the entirety of that initial engagement was dealt with by Erebor. Bolg's champions. They were running amok for a second then, so I assume that was a general ability that was utilised by Ricky Beagle. Yeah, Ironfoot Warriors here en masse. Bolg's champions did charge in here. Decent amount of kills on the Ironfoots, but certainly not enough to swing this battle back in the other direction just yet. Holding on a little bit better though, with the addition of those White Uruk Fearmongers, but again it's all about the numbers on display really from the dwarves. and there's not really reinforcements close enough by for the Misty Mountains to stabilise this situation too easily. Champions. Cave Troll Drummers on the way down as well. They could end up getting isolated if the Erebor dwarves are able to deal with that resistance quickly. Khazad having to march a little bit further, albeit they have the most direct route to the fortress at the back. It also means they're more likely, I think, to run into stiff opposition quickly. Luin electing to not attack into this position from Mevin, so Mevin's instead going to move forward and maybe try and make something happen himself. Again, Warrior Halberdiers and Spear Guard. It's a fine enough combination if it's got some real quality in and amongst it, but because they don't really have that, you would still back the quality of the dwarves here. Stonehewers adding that armor piercing as well. Goblin is thinking about charging in, but forming up right in front of the Spear Guard. And that is an invitation that the Stonehewers cannot pass up. And then the Spears will join in as well. They will be pretty dependent on those Halberdiers managing to anchor these units in place as best they can. I mean, that's a good position for the Snaga skirmishers. If they can keep these dwarves penned in place, then getting some really good value out of a very basic unit of javelins is one path they can go down for success. Cave Troll Drummers. From the Thorin's Halls will be able to respond in kind, however. And that's the sort of attention that the Snaga will not do too well under. Meanwhile, other Erebor army starting to arrive close to an infantry engagement as well. Looks like Khazad are doing the same. Bolg's champions charging downhill into the 3rd Legion, getting a good amount of kills on them actually. The more of that dwarven quality you can cut down to size, the better it will be in the long run for you. And again, another decent charge. Again, not quite encompassing the whole unit there, but still managing to kill off a fair amount of them. They're going to be chased off by the spears now, but that was a pretty successful little hit and run by the Bolg's champions there. Colonel Speak's army in these little clusters. I mean, there's a lot of trolls over here as well, so things looking a little bit tougher for Khazad perhaps than they have for Erebor over here, who are now on the cusp of finishing off another one of these little clusters of Colonel Speaks' army. Again, the Goblin Kingsguard are right there. I'm surprised. I mean, they may as well get into melee because they're going to be all on their lonesome, and it's not as if they're going to have to. They can still retreat this way, but very odd movements. I assume that something to do with the game rules is maybe dictating an awful lot of this, but they seem pretty confusing to me. Scourge Raiders. Erebor marching towards the back end of the settlement once again. Scourge Raiders will flee from the onrushing wargoats, sending a few throwing axes the dwarves' way as well. And over here, Erebor have now begun the engagement against Moto, who seems to have a far more condensed army than the other Misty Mountains forces that are within the passageways here. Throwing axes coming in, however, that, again, against the White Earth Fearmongers, that is a very good choice of target for them, but the Snaga skirmishers responding in kind. And the Black Uruks of the mountains helping to shore things up over here. So this is the one instance really where the dwarves have got a bit of a numbers discrepancy against the units they're facing, which is what you would normally expect against the Misty Mountains in all fairness, but based on the setup that has not been the case in the battle so far until now. Victory is almost a certainty. Here in the north, Ered Luin in a second unit of Snaga skirmishers, having a look at the casualties in the dwarven side of things. There are a few, but certainly not anything terminal. The Warriors of the Blue Mountains joining in as well. Looks like the Snaga are out of ammunition, so they may as well be thrown in. Yeah, in this sort of situation, this is exactly the kind of battle where the Wardens of Thorin's Halls are going to be really effective. As we mentioned, the Misty Mountains very dependent on this one unit of halberdiers to try and pin them in place and prevent the casualties from getting too out of control. I don't know if that's necessarily been the case thus far. And more javelins arcing through the air. The rest of the Ered Luin army is waiting, however, so that they can continue to march. They will find themselves up against the next part of Mebhan's army. They've got the furthest to travel before they get to the fortress in the distance as well. Having a look here, and again Khazad getting hit from two sides. As they march their way forward, the Orc Hunters of Khazad will do their thing. Cave Trolls and White Uruk Fearmongers together are a scary duo. And the First Legion, I mean, they would probably not choose to go up against the Cave Trolls if they had a choice. It's probably where they're at their least effective, to be honest, but they will be good against the White Uruks at the very least. And stuff like the Khazad Reclaimers and the Hammers of Gundabad will be substantially better at killing off these trolls, and they don't have the same staying power that the armoured trolls from the other factions have, and we will see the Trolls of Angmar later on, I'm sure, display that, because Cave Trolls are already dropping. Cave Troll Drummers in place. In another ambush party. Going to try and hit the dwarves from the side as they continue to move forward. And in all fairness, still just about hanging on over here. The longer they can keep more of these dwarven units occupied, the more likely it is that further into the mountains the defenders could have a little bit more success, perhaps. Goblin Kingsguard loitering with intent as well, still. And I don't necessarily know if the drummers are going to be super useful here. I mean, they will keep these Moria Spearguard pointing in the right direction, but the trolls will fight to the bitter end, which is rapidly approaching. And the other force, again, Moria Spearguard, standard Goblin Infantry as well. Not too many instances of them. Obviously a very poor quality unit, certainly when you throw them up against the heft that Khazad have. Third Legion turning around. I mean, with the Black Uruks arriving on scene, that will demand a little bit more respect. Again, more point-blank shots from the Snaga skirmishers as well. Khazad are on the cusp of being able to attack into the fortress at the back, the ruins at the very least. Yeah, good hits this from the javelins and some more reinforcements that can be utilised as well. Still these monstrous units threatening the backfield of the dwarves over here. Keep quite a lot in reserve. I mean, they're continuing to send units forward as well. Erebor legionaries now taking over on the front line. Looks like the White Uruk Fearmongers are largely gone. Iron for Axe Throwers would have been the primary cause of that, I would suggest, and still waiting there as well. Crossbows going to try and do their thing as well. Battered remnants of some of Mebhan's army now making their way back as well. No one going through this wide open area. Erebor and would have been Ered Luin who had that choice should they have wished to take it, but they have now vanquished the Misty Mountains except for the wargs, who are retreating back towards where Ered Luin started the battle. And they will be able to resume their march towards the back end of the settlement as well. Here, meanwhile, as you get further into the mountain range, it's going to get more and more difficult for the dwarves to simply rely on their quality alone. They will need to be savvy with how they use their resources. Victory still seems like a certainty for now. The White Orc Fearmongers, if they can grab a hold of that engagement, that could go the other way. Erebor Legionaries and a slightly battered unit of Sons of Durin, finishing off this one unit of Mountain Orc Berserkers as well. Again, are all of these armour-piercing blows going to add up in the long run, though? Dealing with that Angmar force at the back end of the map is going to require some credit left in the bank. And how much will they have? Defeat seems certain for the Black Uruks. Again, how much damage are they really going to be able to do? Warcunts of Khazad, good choice for helping to finish off these remaining units. Ethereal Guard getting involved as well. They have managed to finish off this unit back here. First Legion Pike's taking a good amount of damage though. And the drummers there also. So yeah, the Goblin Kingsguard are going to retreat, and they will have, again, another open lane to be able to get back to the fortress should they desire. Hammer's electing to leave that fight, the dying embers of it at the very least. And Goblin Kingsguard also going to take another retreating lane. There go the Cave Trolls, electing not to attack Erebor in the back, but instead reinforce their own front lines. And I mean, Cave Trolls and Blackback Berserkers, that's going to be, again, an awful lot of damage that the dwarves are going to have to sustain. But Dragon Slayer's trackers, if they're getting involved in melee, they may have used their throwing axes already, but their presence as a high quality infantry unit might be just as important here. Berserkers, defeat still seems certain for them though. That has been the story of the battle so far. Interesting engagements that the goblins have taken, but that dwarven quality has proven too much for them in each instance so far. Just going to be a case of whether all this chip damage allows Angmar to get their team over the line in the long run. A few crossbow bolts whizzing overhead. The trolls getting involved. I mean, over here they're now going to need more reinforcements on the front line, certainly. I think the Drake Broodlings are starting to make a bit of a mess of the backfield as well. Indeed they are. Again, just bulldozing their way through individual units that are scattered like this is exactly what the Drake Broodlings are good at. And going after the Dragon Slayers, I mean, managing to kill off a few of them. Got to keep moving though, because as soon as those Dragon Slayers start swinging those axes, they will certainly live up to their name with the damage that they're capable of doing. And now surrounded between the two variants of the Dragon Slayers. If there was one part of the battlefield the Drake Broodlings didn't want to be in, it would definitely be here, I would suggest, but that would be a good charge. Most of these units will get back up, of course, but as long as you can keep them moving, you're not going to be sustaining too many casualties from them. Getting into the crossbows as well, who will have a drastically reduced level of being able to defend themselves. Dragon Slayer's trackers will probably actually do damage even more quickly to the Drakes. They do count as cavalry after all. You can tell that's the case because of the floating torches that happen when you're in a level of daylight where the cavalry riders have them. So they do actually have invisible riders. They're not going to charge into that front line, or are they? Knocking over that one banner carrier. I mean, the pikes are going to absolutely ruin their day if they stay in melee with them for any length of time. Yeah, and several of them dying off. Blackback Berserker still reasonably healthy, but also now pretty alone on this front line. Trolls doing their thing. Continued march of Ered Luin. That minor engagement they had earlier on, the only instance really of them getting involved in a fight. There goes a Goblin General. And that would have been Colonel Speaks in the south by the looks of things. Yes, indeed. This fight over here again. The dwarves sustaining damage, but still showing no signs of actively losing any of these engagements. This Erebor army has been in the action right from the very beginning, however. Balance of forces evenly matched. Again, the Blackback Berserkers will be responsible for an awful lot of that, but once again, finding themselves overwhelmed really in terms of numbers by the dwarves because of the compartmentalised nature of how each of these little engagements has gone. And now Khazad pretty much securing their positions over here. The dwarves dealing with each ambush as it comes. The only instance where there wasn't really an ambush was over here. This was more of a straight up fight between FW Lewis and Moto Moto. As the trolls continue to fall. Very limited amount of the Black Uruks remaining as well. Now with nothing in the backfield, the dwarves are pretty much free to send forward these units as they wish. Waiting for pikes getting involved on the front as well. Hoping to finish off what very little now remains of the Blackback Berserkers. And that will mean that the only resistance outside of the ruins is going to be from what remains of Colonel Speak's army. As Ricky's Erebor dwarves continue to pick them off. One unit of Ironfoot pikes a little bit further ahead, and to be fair, Nevin does still have his forces here, so it's still not a straight shot for all of the dwarven armies. Ered Luin will still have to pick their way through their own foes. And then they can stack up and try and take this position, which up to now the dwarves have been pretty comfortable in all of their engagements, but having sustained all that damage, they now have to go into the teeth of far and away the best defensive ground the defenders have, as well as their strongest units. So will all of this damage that has added up prove to be the decisive thing? Cave Troll Drummer falling by the wayside. Pikes skewering him. Goblin Kingsguard. I mean, there's still a fair few of them left, so it's just bad luck, I guess, that the Goblin General in this particular unit ended up perishing. And that is a big deal for the Misty Mountains in general, not so much when it's only bodyguard units that you have remaining to you, but you're far more likely to flee at the loss of a general than basically any other faction in the game. Sons of Durin. And over here, Scourge Raiders. Trying to offer their services, and I mean, we do have some extra support now coming in. Not arriving in time, the Goblin Kingsguard, to help solidify the front lines, but it is another speed bump that the dwarves are going to have to get over before they can continue their march. It'll be interesting if the dwarves wait for one another before they do begin their final assault, or whether the southernmost Erebor army in Khazad will begin before the others can get there. Conventional wisdom would suggest they should do the former,
time will tell. Stacking their units forward, I mean crossbows as well. It will prevent the defenders from getting too comfortable. Misty Mountains have got a few ranged options, but considering it's going to be a mostly Angmar-led effort in the late game, with one very notable exception, their ranged prowess is highly limited. Here, the Drake Broodling's still just about alive, capable of being a little bit of an annoyance here. Thinking better of it in the end, electing not to charge in. Something that the Scourge Raiders, however, felt the compunction to do. Bolters charging the trackers as well. I mean, a few of them did perish. Not one of the riders fell as a result of getting the pointy end of those axes. Again, a few kills there. Another Goblin General falls. Two of the three getting surrounded and destroyed now. That leaves just Mevon's general, I believe. Unsurprising to see the Blackbacks the last ones standing. Again, the amount of damage they're capable of doing as they do fall, however, is going to be limited by the fact they're going up against pikes, which means they are not really able to get into swinging range as readily as they would like. Defeat a distinct possibility for the goblins. Mindful Wargoats happily in behind the lines as well. I don't know how useful they're necessarily going to be in the closing stages. Maybe if you can find a gap, you can cause some chaos in behind. Again, these defensive positions, this is where Angmar are going to be a very tough nut to crack. Tron Pikemen and Guardians of Kharn-Dûm. Trolls, I mean the Witches are there as well. That's always going to be an absolutely terrifying thing to face off against, especially when you know you've got to advance into these positions. So some of Mavon's forces, pretty intimidating slope to try and get up. Not yet ready to spring the final ambush they have in the back pocket. Erebor have now managed to secure their position, but they've still got a long way to march. Just a few of the Blackback Berserkers remain. And not for much longer, certainly. And there we go, finally. Have been able to secure their position. Completely Erebor. Nope, there they go, they're fleeing. Yeah, Erebor ready. Khazad also. And the Orc Hunters sort of beginning to poke away at some of Angmar's defences. And going after Angmar Marauders, again, not a very intimidating unit by any means, but also not really going to be doing a huge amount of damage to the armour upgraded Guardians of Kharn-Dûm from the front anyway, so at least you will get a few more kills going after a unit like this. Heavy Goblin crossbows would probably be the first port of call in terms of trying to skirmish the enemy down, mind you. Or of course the Witchers, but there's no way that Flame of Arnor is going to leave them out in the open to be an easy target. Of Azaghal in the distance. Mevon retreating another unit of his heavy goblin crossbows into the defensive lines. both of the high-end infantry units from Angmar over on this side ready to face off against Ered Luin by the looks of things. Again, what path is this Erebor army going to take? They go down this way in a reasonably wide corridor over here. And those javelins were pretty good earlier on. No reason why they can't be again. More units taking shelter. And I would assume they're trying to safeguard the lives of their pikes because Erebor are going to be rolling forwards with their crossbows. Again, the archers might not do a huge amount of damage to the Guardians of Khazad, but the crossbows certainly will. This has the potential to be pretty painful for Angmar. The Guardians of Khazad are going to be a real pillar for them in terms of trying to hold on to this ground back here. Taking a huge amount of casualties there, just the one. Scourge Raiders could have sallied forth to make life a little bit more difficult for Erebor, but the close proximity of those pikes means that they're ready for that eventuality anyway. Over here, still waiting, biding their time. Ered Luin are largely in position, really. They are going to have to deal with some more units, but really the only dwarven force that is not in place and ready to assault the ruins is this one. Marching their way into place now, though. I think my voice is on the way out, unfortunately. This will be the last recording of the day, certainly. Ironfoot crossbows. Out of ammunition, axe throwers and warriors. Going to be the first ones in. Are we going to see the infantry engagement get underway? Khazad creeping their way forwards as well. Scourge Raiders using that terrain advantage they have to lob a few axes into the approaching dwarves. I like the square boots that the Erebor dwarves have. Snowshoe-esque. Scourge Raiders again menacing a front line. They won't get the opportunity to do that again with the Sons of the Fallen in close proximity, but that's where the throwing axes can come into play. Again, this is a wider front line for the defenders to have to deal with, but it's also the position where they've got a very nice supporting angle, and the Witchers being right there. If Khazad has noticed that, then they will know what fate is almost guaranteed to befall them. Still quite comfortable there. Ered Luin not getting into range with their own ranged units just yet in the way that we've seen Erebor and Khazad do. But Erebor are going to engage in melee. The Barrow Wights revealing themselves, they're going to again be really awkward to try and wear down. Angmar in general are going to be a real challenge for what the Dwarven quality, especially in terms of their damage dealing, is capable of. So far just the pikes moving in. I mean, again, when you look at this engagement, you wouldn't want to be on the Dwarven side of this one, would you? But some good support coming in. Those crossbow bolts whizzing overhead. Scourge Raiders as well. I mean, this attack is surely the green light for Khazad to move forward as well. But now, Ered Luin are going to have to deal with this pocket of resistance, so they won't be able to make their move immediately either. crossbows. Thorin's Hall's getting a good angle on the Black Uruks of the mountains. Defenders of the Blue Mountains on the front. I mean, they would probably not do so great against the Black Uruks in a vacuum, but in conjunction with the Wardens and especially the Juggernauts, this is where Ered Luin are really going to flex their muscles against this ambush party. But again, the time they're buying is possibly a little bit more important than any sort of kills this force could get. Heavy Goblin Crossbows, a unit that wasn't retreated, trying to get some point blank shots and going after, I think, the High Thanes. It could be the Frost Spears as well though. The Repeaters starting to do their thing, and I mean the Frost Spears could be instrumental in trying to wrest control of the ruins away, but for the time being content to help ward off the damage from those crossbows a little bit more quickly. Both units of Juggernauts. Going to try and see the numbers of the Black Uruks tumbling. Continuing to launch some arrows. I mean, there is still a decent force here from Navan, honestly. So they could keep this pressure up for a little bit longer yet. Khazad now joining in the action in terms of melee. Hammers of Gundabad again. If they can get in and amongst the Witch Realm pikemen, that will be a real problem for Angmar, but as long as they keep their front lines organised, they should be able to keep all of the Khazad shock infantry at arm's length. The main issue Khazad have, of course, is the fact that if they do send in an overwhelming force to try and crack this line in terms of mass, the Witchers would immediately target that. So you've got to try and strike that happy middle ground, and indeed there are the Witchers. If Khazad has seen that, and if they have any arrows left to them, then they should try and get some shots. Defeat almost a certainty. Erebor Legionaries joining the front line as well, though. You won't be able to get through the Barrow Whites quickly, but more high quality units will certainly help. Interesting actually, the one Troll of Angmar falling fairly fast, and another one as well, and another. Goes to show how damaging Khazad higher end units and even their line infantry can be when they're condensed together like this. But here come the Witchers. And there we go. A bit of friendly fire as well, in all fairness, but largely that is going to be dwarven casualties inflicted. If Google didn't know they were there before, he certainly does now. Devastating as always. Very limited ammo supply though, but if you were going to go after one of these forces, I guess it would be Khazad. Managing to throw off this ambush party now, Ered Luin. Still some more forces. So I guess the choice is now, do you bank up and catch yourself between Angmar and what remains of Mevon's goblins? Again, it's not a particularly large force that Ered Luin has left to them. Some very impressive individual units, mind you. If the Frost Spears can find a good angle to shoot from, that could be key. You have the Erebor crossbows now in range. Pretty depleted in all honesty, but they're going to be there trying to soften up this front line ahead of the infantry and behind arriving on the scene as well. A general's ability being utilised. Is that going to cause infighting? That's usually what the Orcish one does. And we'll still feel pretty comfortable on this front line. And fighting massively uphill are Erebor. If they have any throwing axes still available to them, now might be the time to use them. A little bit of chaos in behind though. Scourge Raiders, I mean the fact they did hit their own units with the Witchers did leave a little bit of a gap in their front line. 2nd Legion Axe Guard arriving on the front as well. Angmar Marauders being tasked with helping to man the front now as well. Snaga skirmishes. Doing their thing. Decent damage that. Even with how many of them there are, though, they wouldn't really want to be facing Sons of the Fallen. Scourge Riders still have throwing axes available. Could be a great opportunity to use them into the backs of Khazad. I mean, over here though, Khazad, maybe because it's a wider position, a little bit easier to attack, seem to be having more joy than Erebor have had thus far. Meanwhile, from the northern approach, Ered Luin going forwards with some force into the Angmar position over here, but they are going to be met with the Hammer Guard and the Black Guard of Angmar, so that'll be a real test for the Juggernauts. And in behind, the rest of the Misty Mountains force is also attacking, but this is a good opportunity for the Frost Spears to earn their keep. As well as the High Thanes, that's going to be a large amount of damage into this Dwarven blob, or into the Goblin blob I should say, the Dwarves. Single unit defenders holding on as a bit of a rear guard. They will be pretty much entirely dependent on their ranged units to do the business here. And now that Ered Luin are attacking and the second Erebor army has arrived at the ruins, we are more or less at the final 10k frames, so we are in the home straight now. In a bit of a retreat, a condensing of the battlefield by the looks of things from Flame of Arnor, trying to make things a little bit smaller and a little bit easier to manage. Which is fair enough, but over here, I mean, could have suggested that trying to keep Ered Luin bottled up may have been the play. But it could be as well. I mean, over here, they're kind of getting forced onto the back foot a little bit more. Khazad was starting to get a little bit of momentum over here, and now that is also going to allow Erebor to escape from that narrow position they were in, and they can join up. I think this is the first instance actually of two of the Dwarven armies meeting up after they were all going down separate lanes previously. So finally they fight side by side. Snaga launching some more javelins in. Victory seems certain. That will be a Dwarven general ability. I don't actually know what the Dwarven general ability does. Don't necessarily need it for morale. Oh, the Witchers. This is a blob of Erebor infantry that's about to get grilled. And that was pretty effective. Angmar are going to need a bit more of that, mind you. You get the sense that if they do get penned back, I mean, they can last for quite a while because of their Barrow-wights and their Witchround pikemen, but the level of damage that's going to be coming their way, if they aren't able to cut down on some of these Dwarven numbers, might be a little bit too much for them to handle. More goats arriving on the scene as well. Victory still seeming certain. Nice charge into the back of what remains. I mean, I guess the Witchers are out of ammunition, so they're just being committed into melee. Though there's certainly no Nazgul, and even if they were, they are largely alone, so this isn't going to be a particularly long-lived effort. Further back. I mean, the Blackguard were not able to retreat fully, nor the Hammer Guard. Some pretty isolated pockets of units, but then more of the units turning around. High Thanes actually taking a fair amount of damage, considering their usual level of performance. But then I suppose they are going halberd to halberd against a far more numerous unit in the White Fearmongers, with the Juggernauts here and the Frost Spears also chipping in. I think Ered Luin will still win this, but it may not be as domineering perhaps as the Dwarven player would have hoped for. These are the sort of things which can add up. Again, using that cavalry. Scourge Raiders have been a constant presence really in this battle. Used pretty well. And the Dwarves continuing the momentum over here. Barrow White's kind of left behind, and scattered as they are, even they are not going to have the necessary strength to withstand this sort of damage coming their way. Orc Hunters in behind as well. Another general ability being used. Khazad Reclaimers and 2nd Legion Axe Guard in the vanguard. It's going to be a lot of damage. Well suited for taking on a unit like the Guardians of Khazad as well. Slightly desperate measures as well to have Snaga be one of your first lines of defence, but everything must be used. Misty Mountains unit from Colonel Speaks still fighting. Sauron statue looking on disapprovingly as the dwarves get ever closer. Although over here, things looking a little bit dicier, you would suggest. Juggernauts. Sons of Durin. I mean, this is the situation really where the Juggernauts should shine against both of the opposition they're facing. But again, these halberds from the Misty Mountains, the White Uruks, doing a really good job. But I think they're just about going to come up short here. Only 14 High Thanes, 13 Juggernauts, but the numbers of this little Misty Mountains war party are starting to collapse at just the wrong time for Mevin, I think. At least as it pertains to outright winning this fight, but they are defanging Ered Luin a little bit, and the Juggernauts I think see that, so they're going to turn back around, and also they're going to need to regroup themselves to try and deal with the Hammer Guard and the Black Guard. Sentries of Khazad, so Khazad actually sending over some support over here. F.W. Lewis's army. Again, Scourge Raiders and War Goats. Not a huge amount of that Erebor force left, so the Witchers did their grisly work. Heavy Goblin crossbows. It's interesting actually, the hill in this respect is actually working against the crossbows. It means they don't have a clear shot into the Dwarven infantry blob. Javelins also having to arc their shots way up into the air. So not ideal for them. The Snaga just running out of ammunition. So now getting recommitted to the front. Everyone having to do their part to try and stop the dwarves from making that progress. Again, reinforcements, but I think it is largely the dwarves from this side of the map that are going to be doing most of the heavy lifting, because I can see this fight being relatively, well actually I don't know, I think the dwarves might have managed to find the right equation over here as well. I don't know if the defenders are necessarily going to have what it takes anymore to be able to turn this one around from here. Dwarves' victory will seem certain now. Be surprised actually if the Moria Spearguard don't rout. Still eager though. Exhausted, but eager. Another Dwarven General ability just then. There's not a huge amount of these high-ticket units left for Angmar either. They'll be disappointed they weren't able to get the Hammer Guard and the Black Guard back into their final stand, because that would have given them a much-needed quality spike when it comes to dealing with the continuing Dwarven attack. Plenty of good regular units they've got, but that quality gap and the announcer not fancying Angmar's chances of squeaking out a victory here, I would be inclined to agree. War goats. Shutting down what remains of the Scourge Raiders. Sons of Durin adding more armor piercing to the front. Second Legion were on the front. In fact, they're leaving the front line now, which is a bit of a strange choice. Either way. Barrow Whites will take a little bit more time to be dealt with. High Thanes, I mean, probably one of the less dominant performances we've seen from them in this sort of situation, but I guess it does go to show if you do have a unit of good quality pole arms, then their ability to solo their way through things is lessened a little bit. Feather in the White Uruk's cap, that. The Juggernauts now truly finishing off the remaining goblins. At the very least, with their triple flags, they're a very easy unit to see from a distance, the Juggernauts. They've also got a weird, I don't know if it's a bug or not, but they've got this weird thing where they're constantly fidgeting. When units are stock still, they play animations, obviously all the units in the game, but the Juggernauts, they seem to be constantly going. They'll be pretty much entirely dependent on units like the crossbows doing an awful lot of damage very quickly now if they're going to turn this one around. But the balance of power is rapidly slipping away. Currently the difference being 7%, and I think that's probably going to grow in the Dwarves' favour as the battle rages on. No longer have access to the witches or anything like that. I mean, cutting down the Dwarven General there, one of them, viciously with the point-blank crossbow volley. But again, far less of a problem for the Dwarves than it was for the individual Misty Mountains armies earlier on. Made of stern stuff physically and mentally, all of the Dwarven factions. Yeah, just regular units back here in reserve. Well, no, yeah, it is. It's just the one unit of Guardians of Kharndoom that they can send forward. Heavy Goblin crossbows out of ammunition now by the looks of things from Moto Moto. So again, just throwing them in. May as well at this point. Fighting more for pride than anything else in the closing stages. The Dwarves will be able to reclaim some of their mountains as a result of what they've done today. Barrow Whites. They would be a long way from the Barrow Downs, to be fair, here. High Thanes, there are the Ironfoot War Goats, who have still been roaming around in the backfield. Actually a general down there. Is that what they're after? Yes it is, just saw it in time. It was almost like a firing squad, that. It was up against the wall and they charged lances down. An inglorious end. Third Goblin General. 3rd 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 There's a big feeling of inevitability about all of this now. Defenders may as well, I think, just throw everything into melee to at least try and have a little bit of strength in numbers, other than, of course, a unit like this. I mean, up on the hill over here, they do have a decent enough angle now, but I think it's going to be too little too late. I don't think a single unit of heavy goblin crossbows is going to be enough to turn things around dramatically here. Heavy gobbos. There's 2 units of them, I suppose. Dwarves may be put through a little bit more pain yet before their victory is confirmed. The 2 heavy hitters of Khazad arriving on the front line now, the guards of Khazad and the Mithril Guard. An overwhelming addition to the front line if things were not already in that vein. And the dwarves now sending forwards the Sons of Durin. Gonna try and finish everything off in short order. The dwarves victorious over here now as well, having dealt with the Barrow Wights. This is all that really remains of both Ered, Luin and Erebor from over on this side, however, and it's not a particularly large force. Again, the margins are such that things could have changed around with some minor tweaks, I think, in favour of the Orcs. Some of those ambush parties have been maybe a little bit more successful in the earlier stages. The snowball effect could have really helped them there. But alas, it was not to be. Mechanical clank of the crossbows. Will that be enough to make it a 10% difference? I don't think it will be, honestly. I think the crossbows will end up getting killed off too fast, especially now that infantry is slipping in behind enemy lines the final 1,000 frames, and it's the floodgates have opened. It was really here at the back, I mean, by the design of the scenario, of course, it was here at the back where the dwarves finally started hitting genuine speed bumps. The ambushes were really just an attempt to whittle them down before the final assault here, but in the end, those ambushes were not able to do the level of damage that was necessary to give Angmar the shot they needed at successfully defending this shrine to Sauron. Second Legion X-Guard. Gonna hunt down the crossbows now as well. Ooh, just 1%. I don't think they're going to be able to do it now that the crossbows are engaged in melee. They're going to get basically no kills. The Guardians of Khazad, the numbers of them are tumbling. And there goes the Angmar in general. The final act on the battle is going to be the loss of the general. And there we have it. The dwarves successful. Once again we see actually some appropriate names here. Bolg, Captain Snaga, the Balrog of Moria, who was the first casualty on the field, Azog, and then all of the dwarves, of course. I'm glad that we were able to show this one. I was a little bit worried when I was doing the army composition phase and it crashed 3 times. Of course, visual fidelity was lost a little bit from having to turn it down. It's been a long time actually since I've had to do that, and obviously considering my system is, you know, more than capable of running Medieval 2 at its maximum, it's one of those instances where the game itself is the limitation. But I'm surprised it was on this map, to be honest, because there's nothing really obvious that I would suggest would have caused that. But either way, we were able to show it anyway, and I'm pleased for that, because it's good to see Colonel Speaks getting involved with making some custom battles, and this was a fun one actually. You know, the exact setup of all of the little ambush parties of the goblins trying to pick away at the dwarves as they sort of inevitably march towards the ruins at the back. It was a cool setup, and also very, you know, it was close enough, and things could have gone a little bit differently for the goblins if they were able to take some slightly better fights with their ambushes earlier. That was always going to be the key to this one. But yeah, fair play to the dwarves. Obviously the quality definitely saw them through for the most part, and then when they did get to the ruins at the back, they were able to do things pretty much by the book. and perform very well at that. So let's see what did the damage for. We were seeing this from the perspective of Colonel Speaks, so it's going to be all of the Misty Mountains armies. I mean, the crossbows did very well, as you would expect in this sort of situation. It's one of the best ways for the Misty Mountains to do damage to the dwarves. Kingsguard did okay. Spearguard, that's not bad, considering all of these are dwarven kills after all. Cave Trolls maybe a little bit light on kills there. White-Eared Fearmonger's not so much for him, but I'm sure we'll see better performances in some of the other armies. Yeah, 258. I mean, for my money, they were probably one of the best defensive units on the battle today. And then we've got over 300 kills on the Drake Broodling, so they were a real pain. Blackback Berserkers were maybe a little bit disappointing, but then they were also in battles where they were pretty much on the back foot immediately. And then over here, Heavy Goblin Crossbows, Snaga. Again, I mean, considering their dwarven kills, those aren't bad numbers when you're playing as the Misty Mountains. But yeah, big thank you to Colonel Speaks for making this one and for sharing it with me. Big thank you to all the players that were a part of this. I think I've still got one more custom scenario to show after this. Also a couple of other replays in the backlog as well. So yeah, the content will be coming for some time yet. Yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.